The heavy bag swayed under my gloved fists, like a pendulum marking the seconds until my marriage officially ruined. Sweat dripped into my eyes as I threw another combination. Jab, cross, hook, each punch punctuating the rage I couldn't voice at home anymore. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Sterling, you're going to take that too far, Marko called from behind the bar that separated his boxing gym from the dive he ran next door. His gravelly voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen enough broken marriages to recognize the signs. What's eating you now? I unwrapped my hands slowly, buying time I didn't need. The truth was, sitting in my phone, buzzing with another text from my wife Lydia about her business consultation with Brooks tonight. Brooks, her ex-boyfriend turned business consultant, who'd been spending an awful lot of time at our house lately, discussing interior design projects that somehow required wine and intimate conversations on our couch. Just working off some stress, I said, grabbing my phone. 3 new messages from Lydia, all variations of the same theme. She'd be late, don't wait up. Brooks had some exciting opportunities to discuss. Marko wiped down a glass with practiced efficiency, his dark eyes studying me like he was reading a police report. You know, back when I was doing time, there was this guy, Tommy. Sweet wife, beautiful kids. Tommy kept making excuses for her late nights, her new friends, her sudden interest in yoga classes that ran until midnight. And what happened to Tommy? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Tommy ended up alone in a cell, thinking about all the signs he ignored while his wife cleaned out their bank account with her personal trainer. Marko set the glass down with a decisive clink. Sometimes the writing's on the wall, brother. Question is whether you're gonna read it or pretend it's in a language you don't understand. I walked home through our quiet subdivision, past perfectly manicured lawns and houses that looked like magazine covers. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where people whispered about scandals over morning coffee and everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves. The Hendersons next door were probably already cataloging the times Brooks's silver Tesla had been parked in our driveway. The house was dark except for the living room lamp Lydia always left on when she was out late. I found the hotel receipt 3 days later, tucked between the pages of one of her design magazines like a bookmark marking the end of our story. The Mountain View Resort, a weekend retreat I'd never heard of during the time she claimed she was at a design seminar in the city. 2 guests registered, Lydia Vance and Brooks Morrison. The dates matched perfectly with her supposed professional development weekend. I sat in our kitchen, staring at the receipt under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look clinical and cold. The same lights that had illuminated thousands of ordinary moments, morning coffee, late-night conversations, arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Now they were illuminating the evidence of my wife's betrayal. When Lydia came home that night, she found me reading at the kitchen table, the receipt lying open beside my coffee mug like I was reviewing blueprints for work. "How was your evening?" I asked without looking up from my book. "Productive. Brooks has some really innovative ideas about the Peterson project." She moved around the kitchen with practiced casualness, but I could feel her tension like static electricity before a storm. "We might need to meet again tomorrow to finalize the details." "That's nice," I said, turning a page. "Funny thing, I found this receipt today." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear her breathing change, becoming shallow and quick. "Sterling, I can explain." "I'm sure you can." I finally looked up, meeting her eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "But here's the thing, Lydia. I'm not cutting off my ex just because you want it, right? Those were your exact words 2 months ago when I asked you to stop seeing Brooks." Her face flushed red, anger replacing guilt in the span of a heartbeat. "This is different. Brooks and I have a professional relationship now. We're not, I mean, it's not what you think. A professional relationship that requires overnight stays at romantic mountain resorts? I held up the receipt, letting the paper catch the light. Must be some really intensive design work. You're being ridiculous. But her voice cracked on the last word, and we both heard it. I nodded slowly, folding the receipt and sliding it into my shirt pocket. Fine by me. The next morning, I opened a new checking account at First National, 3 blocks from my office. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd handled our home loan, asked polite questions about whether my wife would need access to the account. No, I said, signing the signature cards with deliberate precision. This one's just for me. I changed my direct deposit that afternoon, redirecting my entire salary to the new account. Lydia would still have access to our joint account, but it would only contain her income and whatever remained of our shared savings. If she wanted to fund her romantic getaways, she could do it with her own money. That evening, I texted Sienna Martinez, Lydia's best friend since college. Sienna had been flirting with me for months, subtle touches during dinner parties, lingering hugs, comments about how lucky Lydia was to have such a thoughtful husband. I'd always deflected her advances, but now her attention felt like an opportunity rather than a complication. Hey, Sienna, I'm planning a surprise for Lydia's birthday next month. Want to help me brainstorm over coffee? Her response came back within minutes. Absolutely. When and where? We met at Café Luna, a trendy spot downtown where the coffee cost more than most people's lunch and the atmosphere practically demanded Instagram photos. Sienna arrived wearing a red dress that hugged every curve and heels that clicked against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. You're so sweet to plan something special, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Her perfume was different from Lydia's, warmer, with notes of vanilla and something I couldn't identify. What did you have in mind? Actually, I said, I was hoping you could tell me what she's been up to lately. She seems stressed about work, and I want to make sure I don't plan anything that conflicts with her projects. Sienna's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, like a mask slipping for just a moment. Oh, you mean the Brooks situation? The Brooks situation? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Sterling, honey, you know I love Lydia like a sister, but she's been making some questionable choices lately. All this talk about rediscovering her passion and feeling alive again. It's like she's going through some kind of midlife crisis at 30. What kind of questionable choices? Sienna bit her lower lip, a gesture that seemed calculated to draw attention to her mouth. I probably shouldn't say anything, girl code and all that. I'm her husband, Sienna. If something's wrong, I need to know. She's been talking about Brooks constantly. How exciting he is, how he makes her feel young again. Last week, she showed me photos from their weekend trip. She said it was a design seminar, but Sterling, they looked like vacation photos, romantic dinners, couples' spa treatments, long walks on mountain trails. My coffee had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway, using the moment to process what she was telling me. Did she say anything else? She asked me if I thought marriage was supposed to feel like a prison. Sienna reached across the table and touched my hand. I told her she was crazy, that you're one of the good ones, but she just laughed and said I didn't understand because I'd never been married. We talked for another hour, Sienna gradually revealing more details about Lydia's behavior, the late-night phone calls, the new lingerie, the sudden interest in weekend trips. By the time we parted ways, I had a clearer picture of my wife's betrayal and a new ally in Sienna. Thank you for being honest with me, I said as we stood outside the cafe. I know it couldn't have been easy. I just hate seeing good people get hurt. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed my cheek, letting her lips linger a moment longer than friendship required. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. That night, Lydia came home flushed and excited, talking about a new project Brooks had proposed. As she described their dinner meeting in detail that felt more like a date recap, I nodded and asked appropriate questions while mentally cataloging every lie. "You seem different lately," she said as we got ready for bed. "More relaxed." "Just trying to go with the flow," I replied, "like you always tell me to do." She smiled and kissed me goodnight, and I wondered if she could taste her own deception on her lips. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Lydia would announce her plans with Brooks, always professional, always necessary, always requiring more time than seemed reasonable for business meetings. I would nod and wish her well, then make my own plans with Sienna. We started slowly. Coffee dates became lunch meetings. Lunch meetings became dinner at upscale restaurants where we were sure to be seen by people who knew Lydia. I wasn't ready to cross certain lines yet, but I wanted the appearance of impropriety to circulate through our social circle like a virus. The first person to mention it was Janet Morrison, who worked with Lydia at the design firm. She cornered me at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that comes from being the first to deliver juicy gossip. "Sterling, I saw you at Romano's last week with that lovely friend of Lydia's. Sienna, right? Such a striking woman." "Yes, we were discussing plans for Lydia's birthday party," I said, loading milk into my cart with deliberate casualness. "How thoughtful of you to include her friends in the planning." Janet's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm sure Lydia appreciates having such a dedicated husband." By the time I got home, I was certain Janet had already called at least 3 people to share her observations. In our neighborhood, gossip traveled faster than the morning newspaper delivery. Lydia was in the kitchen when I returned, talking on the phone in the low, intimate voice she used to use with me. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from soft to guarded in the time it took me to set down the grocery bags. "I have to go," she said into the phone. "We'll continue this conversation later." "Brooks?" I asked. "A client," she replied, but the lie sat between us like a third person in the room. That afternoon, while Lydia was at what she claimed was a site visit, I drove to Brooks's condo complex. His silver Tesla was parked in its assigned spot, and I could see lights on in his third-floor unit. So much for Lydia's site visit. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, watching the building and thinking about my next move. I wasn't ready for a direct confrontation yet, but I wanted Brooks to know he was being watched. I wanted him to feel the same unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I left a note under his windshield wiper. "Nice car. Hope you're enjoying the ride." When I got home, Lydia was already there, her hair slightly mussed and her lipstick freshly applied. She talked animatedly about her site visit over dinner, describing details that sounded suspiciously like the interior of Brooks's condo based on photos I'd seen on his social media. "How was your afternoon?" she asked, cutting into her chicken with surgical precision. "Productive," I said. "I ran some errands, made some plans." "What kind of plans?" I met her eyes across the table, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "The kind that are long overdue." The first public appearance with Sienna was at the Riverside Art Gallery's monthly opening. Lydia had mentioned she might attend with Brooks to network with potential clients, which made it the perfect venue for my own networking. Sienna arrived at my house wearing a black cocktail dress that made every other woman in the room look underdressed. She'd done something different with her hair, swept it up in an elegant twist that showed off her neck and the diamond earrings she'd borrowed from her sister for the occasion. "You look beautiful," I said, offering her my arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, adjusting my tie with an intimacy that would have made Lydia's friends take notice if they'd been watching. The gallery was crowded with the usual mix of local artists, collectors, and social climbers who attended these events more to be seen than to appreciate art. We made our entrance like we belonged together, moving through the crowd with the kind of easy chemistry that develops when 2 people are united by a common purpose. I spotted Lydia and Brooks near a sculpture that looked like twisted metal, but probably cost more than my truck. They were standing close together, her hand resting on his arm, as he explained something that made her laugh. The sound of her laughter, genuine and unguarded in a way it hadn't been with me in months, cut through the ambient noise of the gallery like a blade. "There she is," Sienna murmured, following my gaze. "Should we go say hello?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them enjoy themselves a little longer." We circulated through the gallery, making conversation with people I recognized from various social functions. Sienna was charming and attentive, laughing at my jokes and touching my arm in ways that suggested intimacy without crossing into inappropriate territory. Several people commented on what a lovely couple we made. "Sterling Vance, right?" A woman I didn't recognize approached us near a painting of what appeared to be a melting clock. "I'm Rebecca Chen. I work with your wife at Morrison Design." "Nice to meet you," I said, shaking her hand. "This is Sienna Martinez." "Oh, I know Sienna," Rebecca said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "She and Lydia are practically sisters. It's so nice that you two have become close friends as well." "Sterling's been helping me with some home renovation projects," Sienna said smoothly. "He's incredibly handy." Rebecca's smile suggested she was reading subtext into everything we said. "How wonderful. It's so important for couples to have friends who understand their relationships." After Rebecca moved on, presumably to spread her observations to other guests, Sienna and I found ourselves near the wine table. That's when Lydia finally noticed us. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. Her husband and her best friend, dressed up and clearly comfortable together, being treated by everyone around them as a couple. The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly. "Sterling?" She approached us with Brooks trailing behind her like a reluctant shadow. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting local art," I said, raising my wine glass in a mock toast. "Same as you, I assume." "With Sienna?" "I invited him," Sienna said, stepping closer to me in a gesture that could have been protective or possessive. "I didn't want to come alone, and I knew you'd be busy with work stuff." Lydia's eyes moved between us, trying to read the situation. "I didn't know you two were spending time together." "We've been getting to know each other better," I said. "Sienna's been very supportive during this difficult time." "What difficult time?" Brooks spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the kind of aggressive confusion men use when they sense a threat they don't understand. I looked at him directly for the first time that evening, taking in his expensive suit and carefully styled hair. He was handsome in the way that suggested professional grooming rather than natural gifts, the kind of man who spent more on skin care than most people spent on groceries. "The kind of difficult time that comes when your wife starts working late every night," I said. "But I'm sure you understand the demands of the design business, Brooks." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other guests had begun to notice our little group, sensing drama in the way people instinctively gravitate toward conflict. "Well," Lydia said finally, her voice artificially bright, "we should let you get back to enjoying the art." "Actually," Sienna said, "I was hoping we could all grab dinner together sometime, like a double date." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Lydia calculating the implications, how it would look to decline, what people would think, how to navigate the social minefield that her best friend had just laid out. "That sounds lovely," Lydia said, though her smile looked like it was causing her physical pain. "We'll have to coordinate our schedules." "I'll call you tomorrow," Sienna said, kissing Lydia's cheek with the kind of affection that now carried undertones of betrayal. As they walked away, I heard Brooks asking Lydia what the hell was going on, his voice tight with the kind of anger that comes from being outmaneuvered by someone you've underestimated. "Phase 1 complete," Sienna murmured, watching them leave. "Phase 1? She turned to me with a smile that was equal parts beautiful and dangerous. Sterling, honey, we're just getting started. The next morning I filed for divorce. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who'd handled several high-profile cases in town, walked me through the process with the efficiency of someone who'd seen this story play out dozens of times. Based on what you've told me, we have grounds for fault-based divorce due to adultery, she said, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. The hotel receipts, the photographs, the witness statements from Mrs. Martinez. It's a solid case. How long will it take? If your wife contests it, we could be looking at 6 months to a year. If she agrees to the terms, we could have it finalized in 90 days. I arranged for the papers to be served at Riverside Bistro, Lydia's favorite lunch spot, during the busy noon rush when half the town's professional class would be there to witness her humiliation. The server, a young woman named Ashley who'd gone to high school with Sienna, agreed to make sure Lydia was seated at one of the prominent tables near the window. I wasn't there to see it happen, but Sienna was. She called me that afternoon, barely able to contain her excitement. Sterling, you should have seen her face. She opened the envelope right there at the table, with Brooks sitting across from her and Janet Morrison at the next table pretending not to eavesdrop. She went completely white, then red, then white again. Brooks kept asking what was wrong, and she just sat there staring at the papers like she couldn't believe what she was reading. What did she do? She got up and ran to the bathroom. Brooks followed her, and you could hear them arguing through the door. When they came back out, half the restaurant was staring. Janet Morrison looked like Christmas had come early. That evening, Lydia came home like a storm system moving through our quiet house. She found me in the kitchen, calmly eating dinner and reading the newspaper as if nothing had changed. What the hell is this? She slammed the divorce papers down on the table, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. Legal documents, I said, not looking up from the sports section. I thought that would be obvious. You can't be serious. Over what? Some harmless flirtation with an old friend? I set down the newspaper and looked at her directly. Harmless flirtation? Is that what we're calling weekend trips to romantic resorts now? That was business. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, cutting through her protest like a blade. Just stop, Lydia. We both know what this is. The question isn't whether you've been cheating, it's whether you're going to keep lying about it. She sank into the chair across from me, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured tire. Sterling, I never meant for this to happen. Brooks and I, we have a connection. It doesn't mean I don't love you. But it means you love him more. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were wet with tears that might have moved me 6 months ago. What do you want? She asked. What will it take to fix this? It's too late for fixing, I said. But if you sign the papers without contesting anything, we can both move on with our dignity intact. Well, what's left of it? And if I don't? I smiled, and something in my expression made her lean back in her chair. Then we go to court, and everything becomes public record. Every hotel receipt, every photograph, every witness statement. Janet Morrison won't need to eavesdrop anymore. She'll be able to read all the details in the legal filings. Lydia's face went pale again, and I knew she was imagining the headlines in the local newspaper, the gossip that would follow her for years in a town this size. You've changed, she said quietly. You're not the man I married. No, I agreed. I'm not. That man would have begged you to come back, would have blamed himself for your choices, would have spent years wondering what he did wrong. This man knows better. She left that night, taking a suitcase and promising to return for the rest of her things later. I watched her car pull out of the driveway and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The gossip mill in our town operated with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, and news of Lydia's public humiliation at the bistro had spread through every social circle within 48 hours. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who wanted to express their support, offer their opinions, or simply fish for more details about the scandal. Marko was the first to congratulate me in person. I found him at the gym the morning after Lydia moved out, setting up equipment for the day's classes. "Heard you finally decided to read the writing on the wall," he said, not looking up from the heavy bag he was adjusting. Something like that. "Good. That woman was poison, Sterling. Sweet poison, maybe, but it'll ruin you just the same." He straightened up and studied my face with the intensity of a man who'd learned to read people's intentions in places where misreading them could be fatal. "You look different. Lighter. I feel different. That's the weight of bullshit lifting off your shoulders. Enjoy it." I spent the morning working out with an intensity I hadn't felt in years, pushing my body until the endorphins kicked in and everything else faded to background noise. When I finally left the gym, I felt like I could take on the world. Sienna was waiting for me at my truck, leaning against the passenger door in a sundress that made the parking lot look like a fashion shoot. Several of the guys coming out of the gym did double takes, and I felt a surge of masculine pride that I hadn't experienced since high school. "Thought you might want some company for lunch," she said, sliding her sunglasses down her nose to look at me directly. "Don't you have work today?" I called in sick. Figured my best friend's husband might need some moral support after his wife abandoned him for another man. We drove to a seafood place on the other side of town, far enough from our usual haunts that we could talk freely without worrying about eavesdroppers. Sienna ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's car payments and insisted we were celebrating my freedom. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To truth finally coming to light," I countered. We clinked glasses, and I noticed the way the afternoon sun caught the highlights in her hair, the way her lips curved when she smiled, the way her eyes held mine just a moment longer than friendship required. If this was what moving on felt like, I was ready to embrace it fully. "So what's the plan now?" she asked, cutting into her salmon with delicate precision. "Plan? Sterling, honey, you don't seriously think this is over, do you? Lydia's not going to just sign those papers and disappear into the sunset with Brooks. She's going to fight back, and when she does, you need to be ready." "What kind of fight back?" Sienna leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's already started. Called me this morning, crying about how you've changed, how you're not the man she married, how she thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. She wants me to talk to you, convince you to go to counseling with her." "And what did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it." Sienna's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "But what I'm actually thinking about is how we can use her desperation against her." Over the next hour, Sienna laid out a strategy that was both brilliant and ruthless. We would continue our public appearances together, escalating the intimacy just enough to make people talk without crossing lines that would make me look like the villain. Meanwhile, she would maintain her friendship with Lydia, feeding her false hope while gathering intelligence about her plans with Brooks. "The key is making her believe she still has a chance," Sienna explained. "Desperate people make stupid decisions, and stupid decisions create opportunities." That evening, Lydia called me for the first time since she'd moved out. Her voice was small and uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who'd been flaunting her affair just weeks earlier. "Sterling, I've been thinking about what you said, about us. Maybe we could try counseling." "I don't think that's going to help, Lydia. Please, just think about it. I know I made mistakes, but we had something good once. We could have it again." I let the silence stretch between us, imagining her on the other end of the line, probably in Brooks's condo, trying to rebuild a bridge she'd burned herself. "I'll think about it," I said finally, knowing that false hope would be more painful than outright rejection. "Thank you. That's all I'm asking for." After I hung up, I called Sienna to report the conversation. She laughed with genuine delight. "Perfect. Now she'll spend the next week planning her reconciliation speech instead of focusing on the divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, we ramp up our campaign. Our campaign? Trust me, Sterling. By the time I'm done, Lydia won't know what hit her. The next phase of Sienna's plan involved what she called strategic visibility. We began appearing together at every public venue where Lydia's friends and colleagues might see us. The grocery store, the bank, the post office, the coffee shops where the town's gossips congregated to share their daily dose of scandal. Each appearance was carefully choreographed to suggest increasing intimacy without providing ammunition for anyone who might want to paint me as the unfaithful spouse. Sienna would touch my arm while we talked, laugh at my jokes with genuine warmth, look at me with the kind of attention that made other people assume we were falling in love. The effect was exactly what she'd predicted. Within a week, I couldn't go anywhere without someone commenting on how happy I looked, how good Sienna was for me, how much better I deserved than a wife who would cheat with her ex-boyfriend. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, cornered me while I was checking my mail one afternoon. "Sterling, dear, I hope you don't mind me saying, but that Martinez girl is a breath of fresh air, so much more suitable than, well, some people." "Sienna's a good friend," I said diplomatically. "Oh, I'm sure she is, and I'm sure she'll be an even better friend as time goes on." Mrs. Henderson's smile was loaded with implications. "Some people don't know how good they have it until it's too late." The campaign was working better than I dared to hope. Lydia's reputation was crumbling under the weight of public opinion, while mine was being rehabilitated by association with Sienna. I was no longer the abandoned husband. I was the wronged man who'd landed on his feet with someone better. But Sienna wasn't content with just winning the public relations battle. She wanted total victory, and that meant destroying Lydia's relationship with Brooks as well. "He's been texting me," she told me over dinner at Romano's, the Italian place where we'd been seen together so many times that the waiters now seated us at our table without being asked. "Brooks has been texting you?" "Started 3 days ago. Just friendly messages at first, asking how I was doing, whether I'd talked to Lydia lately. But today," she pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. "Today he got more direct." The message read, "You look incredible lately. Whatever you're doing is working. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime and you could give me some tips." I stared at the phone, feeling a familiar rage building in my chest. He's hitting on you while he's living with my wife? Men like Brooks don't understand loyalty, Sterling. They understand opportunity. And right now, I represent an opportunity to hedge his bets in case things don't work out with Lydia. "What are you going to do?" Sienna's smile was predatory. "I'm going to give him exactly what he's asking for." The coffee meeting between Sienna and Brooks was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Café Luna, the same place where Sienna and I had first plotted against Lydia weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I positioned myself at a corner table in the bookstore across the street with a clear view of the cafe's front window. Sienna had promised to text me regular updates, but I wanted to see Brooks's body language for myself, to watch him make the same mistakes that were about to destroy everything he thought he'd won. He arrived 10 minutes early, probably wanting to establish dominance by choosing the seating arrangement. I watched him select a table near the window, the same table where Sienna had first told me about Lydia's betrayal, and order what looked like an expensive coffee drink. He checked his reflection in his phone's camera twice while he waited. Sienna made her entrance like an actress taking the stage. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a blue dress that was professional enough to maintain plausible deniability while being fitted enough to remind Brooks why he'd asked her to coffee in the first place. Every man in the cafe turned to look as she walked to his table. My phone buzzed with her first update. "He's already talking about how unhappy he is. Says Lydia is needier than he remembered." I watched Brooks lean across the table, his body language becoming more intimate as the conversation progressed. He was using the same moves I'd probably used on Lydia, the intense eye contact, the casual touches, the way he positioned himself to create a sense of private intimacy in a public space. Another text. He's asking about you and me, wants to know if we're serious or just having fun. I'm telling him it's complicated. The coffee meeting stretched into an hour, then 90 minutes. I watched Brooks become more animated, more confident, more convinced that he was successfully seducing his lover's best friend. He was probably already imagining how he'd manage 2 women at once, how clever he was to have options. Final text. He asked me to dinner tomorrow night. I said yes. Phase 2 begins now. That evening, Lydia called me again. Her voice was strained, like she'd been crying or arguing or both. Sterling, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay? Are you sleeping with Sienna? The directness of the question surprised me. I'd expected her to dance around it, to approach the topic with the same indirect manipulation she'd used to justify her own affair. Why would you ask me that? Because Brooks saw you two together at Romano's last week, and he said you looked like a couple. And because Sienna's been acting strange lately, asking weird questions about our relationship, about whether I'm really happy with Brooks. Maybe she's concerned about her friend making decisions that are destroying her life. That's not an answer, Sterling. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. No, Lydia, I'm not sleeping with Sienna, but I'm not going to pretend I haven't thought about it. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. What does that mean? She asked finally. It means I'm a single man now, free to consider my options, just like you were free to consider yours when you decided Brooks was more exciting than your marriage. Sterling, please, I know I hurt you, but this isn't you. This vindictive, calculating person, this isn't who you are. You're right, I said. The person you married would have forgiven you, would have blamed himself, would have spent years trying to win you back. But that person was an idiot, and I'm not him anymore. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately called Sienna to report the conversation. Perfect, she said. She's starting to panic. Brooks probably told her about our coffee date, and now she's realizing she might lose both her husband and her best friend. What's the next step? Tomorrow night, I'm going to let Brooks think he's seducing me. I'll be just receptive enough to keep him interested, just resistant enough to make him work for it. Meanwhile, you're going to call Lydia and suggest that maybe you two should meet to discuss the divorce terms. Why? Because while she's meeting with you, hoping for reconciliation, Brooks will be trying to get me into bed. And when she finds out, which she will, because I'm going to make sure she does, it's going to destroy both of them. The dinner with Brooks was scheduled for Friday night at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in town and the same place where he'd probably taken Lydia for their romantic celebrations. Sienna texted me photos throughout the evening, Brooks looking smug and self-satisfied, expensive wine, intimate lighting, his hand covering hers on the table. Meanwhile, I met Lydia at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where we used to go when we were first married and couldn't afford anywhere fancier. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by weeks of stress and uncertainty. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I figured we should talk face to face. Sterling, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. What happened with Brooks? It wasn't about not loving you. It was about feeling lost, feeling like I was disappearing into this suburban life that wasn't really mine. I listened to her explanation, watching her face as she tried to find words that would undo months of betrayal. She talked about feeling unappreciated, about missing the excitement of her youth, about Brooks representing a connection to the person she used to be before marriage and mortgages and the routine of adult life. I understand, I said when she finished. I really do. Hope flickered in her eyes. You do? I understand that you made a choice. You chose excitement over stability, passion over commitment, Brooks over me. And now you're realizing that choices have consequences. It doesn't have to be over between us. We could start again, build something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. He's walking me to my car, trying to invite himself up to my apartment. I'm going to let him think he's wearing me down. I looked at Lydia across the table, at her hopeful expression and her hands clasped together like she was praying, and I felt something that might have been pity. Lydia, while you're here trying to save our marriage, do you know where Brooks is right now? He's at home. He said he had work to catch up on. I showed her the photos Sienna had been sending throughout the evening. Lydia's face went through the same color changes Sienna had described from the bistro incident. White to red to white again. He's with Sienna, she whispered. He's trying to be with Sienna, just like he tried to be with you while you were married to me. Apparently, unavailable women are his specialty. Lydia stared at the photos, her hands shaking. She wouldn't do this to me. Sienna wouldn't. Sienna's been telling me about Brooks's texts for weeks, Lydia, about how he's been hitting on her, trying to convince her that you're just a temporary distraction. She showed me the messages. I pulled out my own phone and showed her the screenshots Sienna had shared with me. Brooks's texts to Sienna revealed a man who was already planning his exit strategy from their relationship, who saw Lydia as a stepping stone rather than a destination. This can't be happening, Lydia said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was already recognizing the truth in what I was showing her. Sign the divorce papers, I said quietly. Take whatever dignity you have left and walk away, because if you don't, this is only going to get worse. She left the diner without another word, probably racing across town to confront Brooks and Sienna. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, waiting for the fireworks to begin. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Lydia's voice was raw with rage and betrayal. You planned this, she said. You and Sienna, you planned this whole thing. I don't know what you're talking about. She was never my friend. She was working with you from the beginning, wasn't she? I could hear shouting in the background, Brooks's voice raised in what sounded like defensive anger. What happened, Lydia? I went to his apartment, found them together on his couch. She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry you had to see that. No, you're not. You wanted me to see it. You wanted me to know what it feels like. She was right, of course. I had wanted her to experience the same betrayal, the same humiliation, the same sickening realization that the people she trusted had been lying to her face while planning her destruction. How does it feel? I asked. The question hung in the air between us like a blade. When she answered, her voice was barely a whisper. It feels like dying. Now you know, I said, and hung up. The signed divorce papers arrived by courier the next morning, along with a note in Lydia's handwriting. You win. But winning felt different than I'd expected. As I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the silence that had once felt peaceful and now felt hollow, I wondered if revenge was supposed to leave you feeling this empty. My phone rang. Sienna. It's done, she said. Lydia walked in on us kissing. Brooks tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but she's not stupid. She knows what she saw. How do you feel about it? Victorious. Lydia destroyed your marriage, so I destroyed hers. Fair is fair. But there was something in her voice, a note of satisfaction that went beyond justice. Something that made me ask the question I should have asked weeks ago. Sienna, why did you really help me with this? The pause was long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Because I've been in love with you for 3 years, Sterling, since the first time Lydia brought you to one of our dinner parties, and because I've hated her for just as long, for having something I wanted and not appreciating it. The truth hit me like cold water. I hadn't been the mastermind of this revenge plot. I'd been a weapon that Sienna had picked up and aimed at her target. My pain, my anger, my desire for justice had all been tools in her larger game. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we see if what we built on a foundation of revenge can become something real." I looked around my empty house, thought about my empty marriage, considered my empty victory over people who had probably never been worth defeating in the first place. "I need some time to think." "I understand. But Sterling, whatever you decide, know that everything I felt for you was real. The revenge was just a bonus." After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my old life and the uncertainty of whatever came next. Outside, the sun was setting over our quiet subdivision, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that looked like the aftermath of a fire. I had won. Lydia was gone, Brooks was exposed, and I was free to build whatever life I wanted from the ashes of my marriage. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, I realized that some victories cost more than defeats, and some flames burn everything they touch, including the person who lights them. The divorce was finalized 30 days later. I kept the house, most of our assets, and my dignity. Lydia moved to another state, starting over with nothing but her professional skills and whatever lessons she'd learned from her spectacular fall from grace. Brooks's business collapsed when word spread about his habit of seducing his clients' wives. He left town owing money to half the contractors in the city and a reputation that would follow him wherever he went. And Sienna? She waited exactly 1 week after the divorce was final before showing up at my door with a bottle of champagne and a proposition. "So," she said, leaning against my door frame like she owned it, "ready to start that new life?" I looked at her. Beautiful, dangerous, victorious Sienna, who had orchestrated the destruction of my marriage for her own purposes, and realized that I finally understood the difference between justice and revenge, between moving on and moving forward. "Actually," I said, "I think I'm going to start it alone." The surprise on her face was worth everything I'd been through. For the first time in months, I was the one with all the power, the one making the unexpected move, the one leaving someone else wondering what came next. I closed the door, walked back to my kitchen, and opened a beer. Outside, I could hear Sienna's car starting, then driving away into whatever future she'd have to build without me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I smiled without calculating the effect it would have on anyone else. I was alone, but I was free. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters.